In today's video, we learn once and for all that the white cloud is definitely the toughest nano fish on the planet.
Hey guys, and welcome back. I'm Rachel O'Leary, and today we are out by my copious amounts of yard tubs because it's time to move the plants into the greenhouse. I determine this when the daytime temperatures are at a point where the plants are no longer actively growing. Around here, that's in the 50s or so for most of the plants that I've chosen. So today I'm going to cut out all of my boxes, load them into my wheelbarrow, move them into the greenhouse, and just put them in shallow containers of water for now because in the greenhouse it's still quite warm. Now, in a few weeks or maybe a month or so, I will, when things start to approach freezing, I will do more of an overwintering procedure, but I'll show you today how I prep them. And basically what that entails is cutting off most of the growth and simply sticking them in a tub. And then I'll cover them for the winter when it gets really cold, open them up again in the spring, and they start to grow. It's really very easy. Now, some of these plants are tropical, which means they may or may not survive the winter, but the vast majority of them will. In fact, I have to buy very few plants from year to year. If you're new here, I do these summer tubs every year. This is my 4th season with it on YouTube and probably my 13th season doing it in my yard, and it's a lot of fun. Anyway, let me get started here just with pulling all the stuff. We'll move it into the greenhouse and then talk a bit more about what we have to actually do. I start just by cutting my zip ties that hold my baskets. Oh, you can see the amount of roots. This sensitive plant, if you guys remember from last year's summer tubbing, went bonkers in the greenhouse. This year it didn't do much in the greenhouse, but it has gone bonkers in this tub. In fact, it's grown around the entire perimeter and through this planting basket here, which I think is pretty hilarious. We will have to disrupt it in order to break down these tubs. Oh my gosh. But you can see the other end of it is here. So again, it's just a magnificently monstrous plant this year. Oh, my goodness. We'll take a look at this in a moment. So, as you guys may or may not know, I have several carnivorous planters floating. These I'll move over next to my bog, and I'll go into more detail about that as well as the season progresses. Ooh, this water is chilly. Oh, man. Now, in this big tub are many of my lily species as well that I'll have to pull out. And those get a slightly different treatment than most of these marginals. You can see, though, with examples like this as to why this works so well for fish to breed. The root structures are bonkers, and I pulled out the water hyacinth weeks ago, but even just with these sorts of plants, it's really pretty incredible. Now I'll either compost this floating stuff or feed it to my chickens. I am going to save a lot of this azolla because I've really been enjoying working with it in terrariums as well. But it overwintered in the greenhouse last year, so I'm just going to fill up a lot of the tubs in there with it so I have it to use again next year. I don't like to move plants from my tubs into my fish room because often there's leeches and mosquito larvae, damselfly larvae, or a bunch of other stuff that just can be really difficult to deal with in an aquarium. So if you were to move plants in from outside, you definitely want to quarantine them separate from your aquariums for at least a month before you add them in. I'm just going to move around the tubs here, pull everything out, and we'll take a look. One of the reasons I really love using these Rubbermaid stock tubs is because they have this bulkhead at the bottom that you can attach flexible tubing to. Now during the season I keep it secured with a zip tie up underneath the edge, but when it's time to drain the tubs, it's really easy just to pop that down and let it drain, because I can tell you, messing in these tubs when the water is freezing cold is not super fun. This sensitive plant is bonkers. I'm going to cut it into sections and try and overwinter some, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Just again to reiterate the insane root structures that these marginal plants get. I mean, this is some purple water iris and some variegated water lettuce, and the roots go the whole way to the bottom of the tub. And that provides a good spot for little insects to hide, for the fish to eat, as well as for the fry and eggs to hatch. And it's why summer tubbing is so successful. You can see I ejected one of our little froggy friends. This happens each year. I get a couple frogs around the tubs. It will probably move down to the river where they estivate down deep into the dirt to overwinter. They certainly wouldn't be able to do that in my tubs. Another word of caution, beware the label dwarf. This is a dwarf papyrus, and it's over 6 feet tall. So while the actual frondage is smaller than the larger variety, the actual plant itself still gets massive. So as we look around, I have emptied a couple of tubs. I'm in the process of emptying the big tub and some of the other Laguna tubs. Then I simply flip them all over, collect all the air lines, and move all the air lines, the tubes, and the sponge filters into the greenhouse for the winter. I'm not quite done collecting all of my marginals yet, but this will all go into the greenhouse for reuse, and again, we'll revisit that in just a second when I show you what I do. Check out the root system on this papyrus. That is just insane. You can't even see where, the only place you can see the pot is right there. Wow. I am going to throw this one in the greenhouse to try and save it, but I don't have high hopes. Now, as I've been draining this tub, I started to see little glimmers, and these fish must be the toughest fish there are for how small they are. There's still white cloud fry in here that I am catching, and they're not big. It's absolutely incredible. Now, I had done a pretty thorough sweep of this, but one of the reasons that I drain it from the top instead of the back in this particular tub is because white clouds are so durable. And I have to be honest, I really did not expect to find any additional, because this water has to be about 50 degrees. But I am pulling out more minnow fry, which is good for me because they're my favorite fish that I tub with. So I'm going to continue to slowly lower this water line and continue to look for fish, because these guys are just nuts. Let me show you what I've grabbed so far. I mean, it's not many. It's only 7. But that's 7 more fish than I would have had. So really take your time when you're breaking down these tubs. I am finding so many fish that I've removed all the plants and almost all of the surface stuff, and I'm going to let everything settle so that I can check back, because let me show you. This is just unbelievable to me. The amount of fish that are still in this tub. I mean, these have got to be the toughest fish ever. This is the bin of Ozola I collected, and I'll just dump it in one of these tubs. And then refill that tub. I need to double check all of these to make sure there's not any shrimp left. I have moved in a few batches from them. And they do appear to be clear. So all I do when I'm bringing in my marginals is take a pair of scissors and basically just hack everything back. And I'll cut off all the roots on the outside of the tub as well, or outside of the basket. Makes it substantially easier come spring to split and repot as needed if you get rid of some of that root mass now. Now this doesn't work for all plants, but I find that it works really well with most of the ones that I use. Look at this. Look at this water mint. It's huge. It smells so good. So again, I'll just place these into tubs of shallow water until it gets quite a bit colder, and then I will cover them with some winter cloth. And look at these roots. Since the plants aren't actively growing at this point, you can just remove all of this. Holy crap. Some of these pots have been going for years at this point, and I think next year I'm probably going to have to redo most of them because they're just so full of roots, it's bonkers. Plus the pots are starting to fall apart from the roots penetrating the holes in the sides. There's some neat physidens or something over here. But again, just chop it back. You don't have to be perfect. I remove dead growth, I'll remove leaves. Like here's a little volunteer maple tree that I don't want. I'll remove any surface algae. You know, anything that I don't want to come back, basically. There's moss all over this one. That'll probably come back next year because I certainly didn't place it here. This bloody dock I'll just leave. It'll wither back. And then I'll take this and I'll just plunk it in a tub. And apparently soak myself in the process. Now there's some of these plants that I'm going to move inside. I have no idea if some of these will come back at all. But there's some that I want to try doing wabi kusa with. So like this one I'm going to set aside because this bacopa is really beautiful. It gets beautiful blue flowers. I want to move some inside. But I'm going to go ahead and do all this and then I'll show you guys when I'm done. So this is what the plants look like now. I'm going to do an experiment and leave all of these with their foliage and see what happens in the spring. Now I've always chopped them back, but I really don't know why. I must have read it somewhere or was advised to do that. So we're just going to do an experiment and see what happens. I'm also filling up this tub. It has all the azolla I collected from the 300 gallon, and I'll throw a greenhouse panel on top of that. Last year it overwintered. If it overwinters this year, then I've got a great jump start of floaters for next year. Now for lilies, I do something very similar, and I've shown this to you guys every year. Chop off all the foliage, throw them in a black trash bag, put them in your garage, a cold basement, or somewhere where it's slightly insulated from a hard freeze. Though the vast majority of them can take pretty profound cold, it's just how fast they get cold, similar to the carnivorous plants we'll talk about here in a few weeks. So again, just going to chop off all these lily pads, throw them in a black trash bag, and then open them up in the spring. That's a wrap.